The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and don't reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any of the, quote, fire content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are the opinion and are not intended to malign a religion, a group, a club, an organization, business individual, anyone or anything, unless, Sarah?
You're a douchebag.
Yeah. We're not doctors, psychologists, therapists, licensed counselors, or shamans, even though you kind of think you are sometimes.
I'm like an urban shaman. Okay. Good talk. Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So those 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wind of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Vanessa Grigoriadis.
You got it.
Say it, Sarah.
You got it.
Oh, yeah, I'm a professional.
Who
I'm
is
a podcast
this?
host. I'm a podcaster. That's what I do. Thank you.
You've really embraced this.
Thank you. My one-person audience over here.
We have a really exciting thing to announce, which is that we've been in our new home for almost 2 months, and we finally have the cords, like all the tech, the Focusrites, the cloud lifters, the cords, the thingamajigs, the mics, to record across the table from each other.
Podcast room.
We have a podcast room. We don't have the panels up. In about 3 weeks, the panels will be up and it'll sound even better. But the fact that we're in our new home in Atlanta, facing each other, and also like sharing this episode with somebody that we haven't spoken to in over 5 years, it just feels kind of...
And the serendipity that facilitated that with Mara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. So I'm just tripping out over here. I'm just like, wow. No. So let's give our listeners, people don't know who Vanessa is. I'm just going to tell you 2 things. Okay. First of all, this is a 2-parter. It was a really long conversation.
This is a double
It's a double-parter. And it was so great to reconnect. But let me tell you who she is. She's a long-form journalist, a host, a podcaster, as well as the mother to 2 children and 2 parrots, which I did not know. Her podcast, Infamous, takes a look at what it's been like to cover some of the most scandalous news stories in modern times. And that's where our intersection with Vanessa lies. She worked as a journalist covering the NXIVM case. How did that come to be? Do you want to tell our listeners?
Pretty sure our podcast gets into that.
Well, just to set it up, though, we did the New York Times, and then we heard from our people on the ground that they were going to come back with the truth, and they were going to have a response piece. And let's keep in mind that NXIVM had never done any press ever.
Because they know when anyone looked under the hood, they're going to freak out.
Yeah, but we thought it wasn't noble to engage with the media who are inherently unethical. So it was better
you can always find a problem with every system that has the potential to hold you accountable.
Yeah. Needless to say, this was going to be their first article. So we were out. We'd been out for a number of months, and we heard from our people on the ground on the inside, our spies, as you might say, that there was going to be a counterpiece also in the New York Times. Now, it turned out not to be the New York Times. It was New York Magazine, but it's all connected, right?
They're both in New York.
Both in New York. I've clearly done my research. Yeah. But no, they all know each other, and I believe it's under the same umbrella, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, I was doing a lot of press. I'd even had to hire a PR team helping me navigate like being an actor and like, do I want to do, Inside Edition past on that, and do I want to do Dateline? I was going to, and then we ended up pulling out. Long story. So anyway, talking to Vanessa for me was a no-brainer, especially if we knew that she'd been talking to NXIVM. I had to make sure she didn't just have one side of the story. But there was a lot of
conjecture.
Yeah.
Some of it
was
somewhat rooted in reality.
And we'll get into that whole backstory. Like there was, of the people who left, there was sort of a disagreement of should we talk to her since she's already like infiltrated and maybe she's like working. We didn't know if she was working for them or if it was like a puff piece.
Right.
Or whatever. We didn't know.
We didn't know if she had her strict objective journalist hat on.
Because we didn't know who she was.
And if that was the case, we felt like we could help her for what to look at and how they're going to try and indoctrinate her, word salad her to get her to write a piece that was painting NXIVM in a positive light.
That was sort of like our worst case scenario. Oh God, the NXIVM's going to be painted in a positive light thanks to this shit show.
But it also just goes to show, like, it doesn't matter what the journalists do. If the DOJ or has charges or whatever, it's like, you can write your puff piece. This guy's still going to jail.
I mean, if knowing what we knew now, it wouldn't have been a problem. But at the time, we were kind of freaked out. And so we agreed to talk to her off the record. Also, because we just didn't want them, NXIVM, to know. Right?
We didn't know.
We didn't know how it was all going to go down.
Right?
So the last time we spoke to Vanessa is when we were both interviewed by her for this piece, which we will include in the show notes. And this is our like almost 5-year rendezvous with Vanessa Grigoriadis. And make sure to listen to part 2. We'll include some clips to Infamous. And if you want to hear some of the most crazy dialogue, listen to this whole podcast. It's wild.
Listen to her.
She has, she has access to crazy footage.
I'm not going to assign homework because I know that's getting a little bit old. But her podcast is great because she actually has the interviews behind the scene. And she gets Allison Mack before Allison Mack turns. She has Claire and like her strategy. It really fills in a lot of blanks for us. And I imagine it will for you all as well. And it also, on a human level, it shows how someone who's going in with eyes wide open can be lied to and misinformed to paint a narrative that wasn't particularly favorable because Keith is Keith, and it's hard to kind of spin that if you haven't been told how great he is before. But it does show how these things work or don't work. Vanessa's story is a great one to show how this can happen to kind of anyone, not obviously in degree, but in a short amount of time. She didn't know them that well. And for her to write the piece and then subsequently see what happened in the trial was hard for her as well, right? So anyway, give it a listen. It's great.
I really enjoyed this
Vanessa's
conversation.
Great. Yeah.
It's just really nice to, part rendezvous, part for us filling in the blanks of things that happened behind the scenes that we could only imagine. And I appreciate everyone who reached out to tell us about Infamous. A few people were like, you might not want to listen. It's pretty triggering. And there were parts that were, but generally it just fills in the gaps for us as to.
It also confirms our concerns.
Yeah, it does confirm some things. So
right.
Enjoy the convo. Listen to both parts. Let us know what you think. And also, if you're interested, you can read her first article. And I think she wrote a follow-up, and we'll include that as well. Right. So without further ado.
Vanessa Grigoriadis.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's been many, many years.
5 years, actually, I think. Exactly, almost. Almost to the day. I think it's almost to the day. Like, I feel like it was January, February.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever they were scrambling. So yeah, it was about this time of 18.
Back when they were like, maybe we should hire a PR firm and clean up our act.
10 years
so
too
much
late.
to discuss.
Crazy. Yeah.
All right, where do we start? Where does this whole thing start? I could be something to the effect of, it's interesting, Vanessa. I don't know why these accusations exist. In essence,
right.
I live a very simple life.
I live a very simple life.
And
the
faux humbleness that I heard on your amazing series, by the way, is so good, Vanessa.
I know.
Well, you had gold, and you took your time and put something together that was just bang on. I loved it.
We had so many of our listeners being like, "Are you aware of this?" And I don't know if you want to listen because it's going to be kind of triggering. And I was like, "Oh God, what now?" And then our mutual, well, I guess your team, Mara, who's our mutual friend, reached out, and I was like, "What a small, crazy world that." She's doing your PR and we know her here. But before we get into all that, first, how are you? How are you doing? How are your
I'm
kids?
good. Yeah, I'm
How's
good.
life?
I have 2 kids, which is, nutty, as you both know. I live in
Yes.
New York City, which Nippy knows a little something about. And yeah, it's nuts. I mean, I'm whatever. I'm taking care of my mom, which is like the big thing. So, but other than that, I'm making podcasts.
How old
and
are your kids?
6 and 11.
Okay, so you had kids when we talked.
Yeah.
We weren't really talking about you and your
Actually, you
life when
just
we
had
spoke
one.
originally.
You would have just had one.
I had just had one.
Wow.
That's right. That's why when I was in like Washington, I mean, so when I look back, I think to myself, oh my God, why didn't I meet Nippy in Vancouver or something like that? Because I was touring my book and I think I was in Seattle. And I remember you and I talked on the phone and you were like, don't you want to like just come to Vancouver and meet me? And I was like, dude, I got to get home. Like I have a baby, and so, but I think at that point, I still wasn't totally clear on how like deep the story went, right? And that was really my main error, I think, which I made for tactical reasons. But had I known how dark this got, I would have probably done a different tactic, right? I mean, like I used a tactic that works very well in journalism, which is like focus on the get everything you can get from the get, and then move on to the other people, and the get was obviously NXIVM. But I didn't realize, which I would be curious to talk to both of you about as well, because I know that a lot of stuff came out at the trial that wasn't known, right? But I don't know. I mean, I could have done it differently, but then I would probably have lost them.
Yeah, let's backtrack because this is like the crux of what we want to talk with you about because it's so fascinating what they did to you and to all of us, the big con. But like for those people who don't know this whole thing, tell us like a little bit about yourself and who you were as a journalist and how you heard about this. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so, I've been a journalist for 25 years in New York City, pretty much altogether, and written for New York Magazine for a million years and Vanity Fair and the Times Magazine. And my specialty is sort of scandal, right? And I've done a lot of like boldface name profiles. I've interviewed, Madonna, Shakira, Lady Gaga, like big, long interviews. I had the first interview with Lady Gaga like ever, and she was in character, right? And I also do investigative stories, but the investigative stories that I tend to do are more about like what's going on with the Dodgers and how is the money moving around and what is the corruption there and how does MLB work and all of that. They're not as much about, certainly I've done some crime, but I do not specialize in crime. Like, and true crime is not my thing. But on a personal level, I, do a lot of yoga. I'm very much a seeker. I wrote a big piece about the Landmark Forum that we can talk about. I
Would love to.
wrote a big piece about Anya Sara and John Friend. My personal interest is in like, how do I live a better life and how do I make people around me live a better life? I would say, Nippy and I went to similar kind of prep schools, and a lot of my work focuses on like the rich and powerful and is trying to like work out my own feelings about having grown up pretty middle class in this world that really wasn't my own, mixed with like a desire to figure out like how to be a better human in the world, right? So NXIVM got me at first with the like, how do you be a better human in the world? Because I was like, I want to be a better human. And then over and over, they kept on talking about humanity in this weird way where I was like, it's not a chair, you guys. Like, you can't just keep talking. Just every time I ask a question, you can't just say, for the sake of humanity. Like,
What does it even mean?
I don't know. What does it even mean? It felt so 80s to me. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like it felt very much
Late
like
80s.
their philosophy was stuck in this time when everybody was talking about like Live Aid or something, like saving humanity, down to Keith's like feathered haircut,
How are you approached?
So I was working for the New York Times Magazine when the story came out about the branding. And, the Times has many different desks, right? And all of them are separate. And the magazine in particular, because we do stories that cross over all the different beats, is basically sort of like its own little, team. And we have to make stories happen, even if we don't have like deep sourcing in, the area of healthcare or in Ukraine. Like, it's very much like the journalists there just make the stories happen however they're going to. And the idea is like a beginner's mind in some ways is a better storyteller mind, right? Like, and we all sort of know this, that sometimes when you're, writing about something so well, you can get really confused and you don't know how to present the information. So like, it's really, really simple for everybody to read who's coming as a newcomer to the information. So I think this works for storytelling for like long pieces, right? Like we're talking like 10,000 word, 10-page stories in the magazine. So what happened was I have a friend who is a male writer, and he called me up one day and said, I think I have a story for you. And he said, the reporting in NXIVM is totally wrong. And actually, they were all consenting and they want to tell their story. And this is somebody I have a huge amount of respect for, right? So I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I was like, well, why don't you want to do the story? And he said, well, I don't want to do the story because I'm a man and I don't feel, it's appropriate. But I talked to Allison Mack and I totally believe her. And I think this is a really fascinating story about like, consent, assault, where the line is, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, okay, that sounds good to me. And so he turned me over to Claire. And so that's how the whole like ride started. And from there, it was this question of, well, what about Barry? Right? Because Barry had already done the reporting.
Right. Barry Meyer, for those who don't know.
Right. And so our position was like, we're doing new reporting. We're the magazine. We do this all the time. But it was, not a great situation. So I basically was coming in already knowing that there was some friction in terms of Barry was like, well, if they're going to talk to somebody, they should talk to me. And I was like, well, I don't know, but it seems like I got the story, So there was like that journalist, kind of competition thing where I was like, why would I give you the story? And then the incredible thing that happened is NXIVM said, well, we're not sure we want to talk to you. We want to talk to Rebecca Traister at New York
Who's
Magazine.
that?
She's a massive feminist writer. She's a massive feminist. She writes about like Hillary Clinton or Nancy Pelosi. She's a political feminist writer. And I was like, Rebecca Traister does not want to do something about your cult. Like, are you being real?
You weren't sure at that time if it was a cult. You were going in like, we don't know at this point, right? What was your mindset?
I was going in, I think the interesting thing is to think back to what part of this was me trying to convince myself that I was going to get this really great story. Maybe there is something awry.
Dangling the carrot.
Right. And what part of it was me truly feeling like this was not a cult? I would say that, as I say in my podcast, I think cult is a gross word sometimes. I think it's applied too much. I think like there's all sorts of like little, religious offshoots that shouldn't be called cults. It's not right. Christianity's a cult. Like, it's a weird word. And so that part I was willing to like be like, yes, I will definitely hear you guys out on this. And yes, I'll hear you out on everything. Like I was willing to hear them out on everything. And I was willing to like basically think it through with them.
I think that might be a reason because you demonstrate you can be sensitive to things that most people aren't sensitive to. But I think there's an oversight, and there's a reason I'm jumping in here. I heard in your series where India said one of the reasons you were targeted is because you seem to be a feminist. Why do you think feminist writers were being targeted? I think that's really interesting.
So I thought, when I heard that they were trying to talk to Rebecca, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, maybe they're right. Like, maybe we do sort of have it wrong. At the same time as thinking, like, are you guys lunatics? Like, why would Rebecca Traister ever talk to you? Like, she's in the Capitol talking to Hillary Clinton right now. Like, that doesn't seem to make sense, right? So I felt that was like the first sort of like cognitive dissonance thing that I felt. But I think generally, yeah, you're right. Like, there was, from their perspective, now looking back, I can think of it, like there was a narrowing of focus, right? Which is like, why would nobody believe us that Keith wasn't involved in DOS? Why would feminist writers not think that this was feminist? Like, you know what I mean? Like that inability to navigate like objective reality. And I think that was probably part of it. And they thought that this was very obviously, Keith, and I think it all comes from Keith, right? Keith's perspective, which is, let's jump in here. Let's get a feminist writer. Let's have the female writer say and vouch for our, way of
women's empowerment,
gender, right? Like gender ideology, which is basically like, this is empowerment and you guys don't get it because you're sheep and you're victim-y and, we're against the culture. And I mean, it was actually kind of a smart thing if it made any sense whatsoever.
It actually is smart. I think it is too, because you're leveraging the feminist. And why would the feminist stand for brand? It's actually smart if he could have pulled it off, but that's where his arrogance.
Right. And this idea that like, I mean, and again, with the branding, I was like, okay, I mean, people get brands. I have friends who have brands. I have friends who have, things through their noses and tattoos and blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, like it's going to be more hardcore. The incredible thing going back to these tapes is I was like, I remembered the whole reason from their perspective of why this thing went down was Nippy coming to the Coach Summit and throwing a fit. Right? It wasn't really about like Mark's partner. Like it really, they had sort of moved past that part. Like she is sort of non-entity in Keith's mind, maybe because she's a woman and she's not important and she's not smart and she was just annoying or whatever it was. Right. And, they were certainly very angry at Sarah, but that was also like a side thing. It was like Nippy walking into the Coach Summit, having a tantrum. Right? Like, and that was the moment when everything fell apart. I mean, is that how you both feel?
Go ahead.
We know that it was a strategy. We know that it was those things. And the interesting thing about it for me was I was with someone who I had just told the night before who was coming to the Coach Summit. And I said, listen, I'm going in there and I'm going to make a fucking stink tomorrow. And here's why. Blah, 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 blah. He had a hard time believing me. I go, look, here's the deal. You got to make a decision right now. You're in with me to go in here and do this. I'm going to go up there and do this tomorrow. Or you can go back and you can pretend, but tomorrow this is happening. And I went and parked the car and he's like, you should record it on your phone. And I put it in my pocket.
That was my idea. That's why I like people know it was my idea.
Oh, it might have been your idea, whatever. And I go in there, do my entire thing, go back to my car, call him and say, where the fuck are you? He's like, I haven't gone in yet. I go, meet me on the side. We're getting out of here. It already happened. So I knew going in there and ringing a bell really, really loudly was going to have an effect. I knew what they were going to say to me. They were going to discredit me, my character, but I knew there was enough people who knew me to know if I reacted that way, not just there, but elsewhere, and how they were going to have to contain the shrapnel of that was just going to cause a slew of problems for them that was just going to buy us time.
Right.
And that was the initial. It wasn't this long-term thought-out thing. I was like, we need to buy time. I was like, I'll go in there and flip some tables, which I literally was going to do. I was going to flip a table, but then I was like, no, that means Revy, Camilla, and all these people that I like are going to have to clean up the eggs.
Right.
And I just didn't want to do that, so I just grabbed a couple people. Yeah, it was a thoughtful temper tantrum. And so I went in and said what I had to say, and in hindsight, I would have said more, but I think the punch landed, and then, that kind of set off chain reaction of events.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it?
Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
And who knows, maybe we would have done something different knowing what we know now. But I think given where we were at and the information we had, it was the best course of action.
Also, it was the voice of outrage, which no one in there,
Would ever do.
Right.
their voice of outrage was dead.
Right.
Everyone. And I think if they saw someone who was, they looked at as a leader in the organization, use outrage appropriately, and then find out the reason I was outraged was because my wife had Keith Ranieri's initials in her crotch. That's a logical premise that I think most people, regardless of how asleep they are, can go, well, I understand why Nippy did that. I don't agree and I'm staying, but still, that's going to plant a seed somehow if someone went in there. And obviously, I don't want to handle my problems with violence and be in that category, that demographic of people, but I felt like outrage is an appropriate note at this point, and I'll live with the ramifications of that. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. They had to be sort of, roused from their slumber, right? Like, I mean, I think that's another point that Keith and Claire and everybody kept making to me, which is like, if they
Just
if they want to
go. Yeah.
go. Why do you have to ruin our organization? Why do you have to ruin our business? This is so vindictive, So that was the, what is moral about this?
I have a
right?
question. Did
Yes.
Vanessa, did Nancy play you my voicemail
No.
to show how angry I was? No, she didn't. Okay. But you saw the Vow season 2?
Yes.
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 So apparently she played that voicemail for a lot of people, as they also showed my branding video to a lot of people. Did they ever show it to you?
Right. No, they did not. But you
Okay.
heard on there
Yeah.
that they
Did show it to people.
were knowledgeable about it. They did put
Yeah.
me on the phone with a private investigator who was
Following us?
investigating. No. I mean, God, I think had just been involved in the idea of trying to get you in trouble in Vancouver. And I was like, what? Like, what are you saying? And look, I did think about writing a book or something after this because I had a lot of extra material that I couldn't fit in the story. But when I realized that everybody was writing a book that was much closer to the situation than me, I was like, there's no reason for me to be in this. And I really like Sarah Berman's book. I think she did a great job.
I thought that, but I was going to
I think
say
she did too.
the two of you could have co-authored a book together. And I do think that book is very comprehensive, cohesive, and like a really good overview. Much more so than mine even because it has all these other, the whole history and the template of abuse is so obvious.
Right. All the breadcrumbs that were there for years. Yeah.
But let's go back to your journey. So, because as you know, we usually follow survivors of how did you get in and what were the red flags and how did you wake up? You're not a survivor, but they did hook you to a degree, right? Was your first interaction with Claire or who did you meet first?
Claire.
Yeah.
Okay, so I talked to Claire on the phone a few times to, sort of understand what the story was, probably being vetted as well. I got a sense of what it was they wanted to say. And I said, okay, well, I need to talk to Allison. So they said, okay, you can go to this apartment in Brooklyn Heights. So I went to an apartment. It was snowing very hard. And I went to this apartment in Brooklyn Heights and immediately thought to myself, is this her apartment? Because it looked like a bunch of things had been taken off the walls. And she was like, oh, I just moved here. I've just left Albany. I'm not living in Albany anymore. I'm living here. And also when I walked in, she had her computer on and she was listening to Keith. I was like, okay, this is pretty weird. But, she was burning Palo Santo and she had, lots of like nice art books. And we had a conversation about Ear Hustle, which is an awesome podcast that we both liked. We talked about her parents and basically sat down on this couch and started talking about her point of view in the story. And she told me pretty much what she had told my colleague, my male colleague, which is that it was all her idea. Nobody was a harem for Keith. The branding was her idea. She was in charge of everything. And it was all just about getting strong. And then I had heard later that some of the ceremonies took place in that apartment. So I don't know why they wanted me to think she had left Albany or what the situation was. I've never quite put that together, like what exactly was going on in this apartment. Do you know?
Wait, this Brooklyn, not Albany. I mean, I got branded in her her apartment in Albany. So I don't think any more branding sessions happened after we left, as far as we know. Oh, no, one round did of the Mexican women under Jimena, who I was branded with.
To answer Vanessa's question, I think you going to Albany and Clifton Park, which you aptly recognized isn't a very communal place. It's Keith just troping from cabana to cabana. I don't think you going to that apartment would have made them look good. I think going to Allison Mack's Brooklyn apartment might present better optics.
Right. Made her seem like independent, right?
And successful.
Right. And successful.
And thriving.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. PR wasn't their strength.
PR was very much not their strength. So, I mean, I talked to Allison, and then right after that, I was supposed to go to Albany, and then it was, oh no, well, Keith isn't in Albany. He's actually in Mexico. So you need to go to Mexico, but he's not running away from anything. Don't worry. And I was like, what? And then you're going to go to Monterey. No, you need to go to Guadalajara. I was like, I'm going to Guadalajara to meet Keith. This is just bananas. Like that was, but I had talked to Claire a bunch, right? And I think the role of Claire in all of this is very vexing and confusing to me, because I will admit that when I was talking to her, I did feel sympathetic to her. And listening to the tapes now, I hear so much more manipulation that I didn't pick up on at the time. I feel sort of stupid, because, I mean, look, my perspective is everybody was a victim of Keith's, right? Like, I really, truly do believe that. And that some people were punished because of the verve that they took in being cruel and,
and the crimes.
And the crimes to other people,
Yeah.
And I think for Claire, and again, PR wasn't their strong suit. And this is not what I think they intended. Like, they really thought I was just a scribe, that I was just going to write down what they were saying. Like, I just don't even understand how they don't understand how journalism works. Like, there's nobody who does that. Like, that's not even like what happens in the National Enquirer. Like, nobody does that. That's why it's called journalism, But by virtue of spending so many hours with Claire, I think I did become naturally, as humans do, more sympathetic to her and worried for her. And I felt like here's this like severely thin, really messed up person, who positioned herself also as a seeker, who's also just trying to say, like, I'm trying to keep everything under control, who I know was not involved in the branding and the sex crimes, right? Like, and that was the part where I was like, well, if she's not involved in the branding and the sex crimes, and she's trying to like keep this organization together, and she's just got this, sort of opaque curtain in front of her face where she can't see like the horror show that's right before her because she's so like brainwashed. What do I do with this person, right? And I think that was like something I didn't ever really resolve in the story, that I still feel like, wow, did I get taken by Claire? Because I definitely didn't get taken by Keith. Like, the minute I met Keith, I was like, whoa, hold up, everybody. This is a problem. Like, this is a real problem, guys.
I know. I know. All the red flags are there.
My father had just passed away also before I did this reporting. And we talked about her dad a lot. because I was very knowledgeable that this was newsworthy, right? And she told me about I was the only child who was there with my father while he was dying, and I never would have had that without NXIVM. And we would, spend every day together, and we talked all the time. And like, he would come up with a big question every morning and say, like, what is the difference between vegetables and fruits? You know what I mean? Like some Keith Raniere question where I was like, oh my God, like, I don't even think this is true. Like,
Mhm.
and I'm not
Mm.
printing this in the newspaper. And
Right.
I don't know. And I really did think to myself, like, should I try to report this? Because there's obviously members of the Bronfman family that are around. And then I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was just like, I'm going to call like Hannah Bronfman and ask, was Claire there when Edgar was dying? And did he ask big questions at the breakfast table? Like, I'm not going to do that. Like,
Mhm.
Right.
so I don't know what to say. I mean, I feel the way that you feel, Nippy. Like, I feel like that was the con that was played on her. But where does her personal responsibility click in, right? Like, he got her at such an incredibly deep level. And you're saying it clicked in for the last 10 years of her doing all of that stuff.
And by the way, I want to address what you said at the beginning, that you feel sort of stupid for falling for it. And I don't
Yeah, I was going to address that too.
I don't think, I mean, I hear you. And I think we've all had different stages of feeling stupid, trust
Yeah.
me.
Try 12
Or
years.
12 years, 12 to 16 years, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's important because, and ultimately, that's why, we have no hard feelings for you. And I want to share the whole backstory of what happened on our end when this whole thing happened. Because our audience, we've never talked about it. Our audience doesn't know. But I think ultimately the fact that you were conned to a certain degree, or at least brought along the path or taking the lifts to a certain degree, was great proof that these tools had a very strong effect. And that's how coercive control works. And you were taking certain lifts with her. And Keith even explained it. I know you didn't buy him in the same way, but Keith explained it to you in a way that, like, by the way, we never heard him say that he had polyamorous relationships and that he first has a conversation. He explained what we call the lifts. He taught us those lifts in sales, and he was telling you how he does lifts in relationships and sex. First I do this,
Yeah.
and then
But
I do
is that
this.
true? Is any of that true? I mean,
That's
he's like, I don't
true.
have one night stands. I was like, I think you have tons
No.
of one night stands.
I don't think that's true. What I think is
Right.
true is that from what I've heard from women who were with him, who are now out, that is what he does.
And I just want to say, not to draw a parallel, the person who referred you the article had buy-in and had credibility. So that's when it started for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The person who brought you the article too. So that you can't underestimate that.
No,
When
Trust.
someone of
yeah.
credibility that respects and trusts comes to you, that's one positive thing being said. So you're already in the journey.
Yeah. I think that was really critical.
It is critical. Nippy had his ex-girlfriend who he trusted. I had Mark Vicente. Not only did I trust, but I respected and had on a pedestal saying, oh yeah,
Mhm.
check out this guy. He's the smartest guy in the world. I'm like, cool. Let's
Right.
not Google him and just jump right in. So
Right.
we all have our ways, right? And people who don't have that type of leverage trust would look at this and go, not for me. So it's not going to happen
Right.
to everybody in the same way.
Right.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're remembering to hydrate, stretch, and unclench your jaws. Sometimes listening to conversations about heavy topics can really make you tighten up, And remember, a little bit culty loves you. Also, come hang out with us on Patreon after you finish this episode. It's fun over there. Fun is good. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it. And I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
I think the other thing is like, obviously I was reading the Frank report, and that was so visceral and just repulsive, and all of this stuff that was happening. And in the end, Frank was doing pretty good work, right? But for me, I probably should have, from where I was sitting, I probably should have been looking more at the Albany Times Union, right? And been more like looking at their reporting, which I didn't, know who Frank was. Obviously, they talked about Frank a lot as well, right? And it was like Sarah, the Frank report, Sarah, the Frank report. Like those were their two main, issues. So I think for me, I was like, okay, well, I have somebody I trust who's telling me these people are on the level. And then I have the Frank report, which seems like, this almost seems like Grimm's fairy tale, right? Like it seems so over the top. Yeah. Where is the, and if you look at Barry's first article, it's written very, very carefully, you know, because obviously he's very nervous about, which everybody should be, and look, journalists don't use the words, I'm nervous about lawsuits, but everybody is, and so he was careful. It was
very data-based. Very data-based is NXIVM terms.
Exactly. Which is exactly what you need to do when you're going up against, an organization with unlimited funds and one that's this secretive, and you have to be completely without reproach. But yeah, I think, I don't think putting Claire with me was a tactic, although I don't know. I can't imagine that Keith wanted me to spend this much time with Claire because he knew that Claire was like no fun to be around. Like I'm sure he was like, I would rather have had her hang out with Nancy and Lauren and be totally like in their thrall. But he had to go to Mexico, which was, by the way, for a visa for Mariana. That was the reason. And I was like, okay, for a visa for Mariana. And then when I sat down with Keith, he said, well, it's because we came here for Christmas vacation. We're just going on vacation. So there were sort of like shifting
Which he never
reasons.
did.
He never went on vacation.
Yeah.
Well, I think you got sent Claire because she's the most experienced.
Oh, you think so? Okay.
And lying for the company.
Right. Okay. But don't you think Nancy and Lauren are much more socially astute?
Yeah, they totally are.
Right. And it was also like empowering Claire because she was the head of the legal department, right? And the head of the PR department or whatever you want to call it. I had no question in my mind that she was in Mexico because he couldn't have her staying away from him and, maybe lose her funds. I mean, definitely. Right.
Yeah. That's his lifeline, I think, at that point.
Yeah.
Did you know when you saw Mariana that baby was Kmar, their baby?
Oh, I knew it was their baby. Yeah, they said. Okay. They said it was their baby, but I didn't know who Mariana was. I didn't know
that was one of the three sisters.
Poor baby.
Oh, so you found out later who Mariana was.
I didn't have any idea. Yeah.
Oh my God.
If you had known, would you have said, "How does it feel to share your lover with your sisters?"
Well, okay, like so. I mean, I wasn't really allowed to talk to Mariana. I was sort of like, hi, and she left, right? I think the turn for me was the three sisters, learning about the three sisters and the room and the
abortions.
Mm-hmm. Even there was so much more detail in the trial than at least I knew. I don't know if you all knew.
No. Look,
you kidding me? Like, Vanessa, we thought we might be the ones in trouble at one point.
Right.
That's how little we knew about what we were holding. It was as traumatic for a viewer. Like, we were spectators once this thing got handed off, and we were like we thought we were in like a cult that was like weird. To find out like
the level of abuse,
our embarrassment took it 10 times then, right? Because I was embarrassed, like I got conned and all that stuff. And then I was like, and that was going on. It got more embarrassing.
Right. But it's also what you said, what I've heard you say on your show, which is they made big decisions for us about what our lives, the shape of our lives, while keeping Keith's private life, secret.
That's my delineation.
Right.
Like, I just kind of like, I have a hard time getting past, like, I gave up valuable years based on your lie and your capacity to lie to me. Like, that's just a hard one for me to
Right.
Maybe I will.
I mean, I think that is, there's so many things that I can't even imagine how hard it is to get over all this. And you guys have done amazing work, like for yourselves and for other people. Like, it's pretty unbelievable. Like, I would not have foreseen all this happening, right? Like,
Neither of us.
I would just, I thought, I think everybody sort of thought like, this is a story that is going to come and go. And when I talk about it now, I'm like, no, this is David Koresh. Like, this is a story that will stay with us as a culture for 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. People are going to be retelling it because it's one of the most like mind-boggling and extraordinary situations of coercive control. And I think that it's like when I was sitting with my editor and we were working on the piece, because I would bring little tidbits back to him and he would be like, well, that sounds bad, but maybe not so bad. That sounds bad, but maybe not so bad. And I remember so vividly when we sat down, we were putting everything together. He was like, okay, so this guy should burn in hell. Like, it's every little thing like put together. It's like tiny dots that are making like a pointillist painting or something, where everything was like just a little, let me take a little here. Let me take a little here. And yeah, I just feel like the thing is, of course, he's not attractive like Koresh. And that was almost like an incredible part of what was, for me, not being, I was really taken by the idea of like, well, here's all these dynamic women who have choices in life and they've chosen to be part of NXIVM. And I thought that was really interesting and worth figuring out. But when I met Keith, I was like, okay, this isn't even an attractive person or a plain person. This person is giving out like a repulsive charge, right? Like, he's just repulsing me. Like, I want to get away from him,
Which I had too, as you probably know.
Right, as you said. Yeah. And like, so for me, there was just like a very, again, I would just say that, so as you both know, I didn't make a lot of calls to defectors at the beginning because, as I said, I felt like, let me get the get, which is NXIVM, inner circle, and then I'll move outwards, right? Because I can't have a bunch of things on the Frank report, right? That I'm doing this. I can't have it twist around like, well, Vanessa, who is a real journalist, is doing this, or she might do this and this. I didn't realize like the degree to which they were not really going to open up to me, but I knew enough to know that's always a bad idea, right? You've got somebody who's ready to put that stuff up there. I thought, and this is how naive I was, I thought, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to ask what NXIVM's all about. And what's ESP and what's XOSO and how does this all work? And what are these different companies? And what is the philosophy? And why do you like Ayn Rand? And these people are going to explain it all to me. And then I'll understand. That is the best way to engage people, right? And I'm not going to engage them by saying, why did you brand women with your initials, saying that they weren't your initials? I'm going to try to engage them about the philosophy, which, if all of these people are into it, must be fascinating, right? And so I got like Keith's horrible books, like the whatever
Odin
they
and
are,
the Sphinx.
right? These horrible, yes, there were two. And I sat there, an entire weekend reading these books. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, I don't know. This doesn't make any sense, but I'll keep going. And I kept asking about and they set me up with Eduardo, and I sat down with Eduardo for a couple of hours at Aubon Pen on Montague Street, and he explained, or Geralaman, and he explained everything to me, how everything worked, and I did not follow it. I read the books, I did not follow it, and I sat down with Keith.
Wait, what was your impression
of Eduardo?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, when I met Eduardo and I met Michelle, and they both seemed like, okay, all right. Like, I was more like, okay, Nancy, Lauren, Allison, Claire, Sarah, I can tell something really serious is going on here. Eduardo and Michelle did a very good job of just like staying on point, being like, I believe in this technology. I've had great things happen for my life. I mean, I was a little like, Eduardo, you're not doing very well professionally. You know, he was very angry at Nippy, right? Which I was like, at this point, I was sort of just like pushing all that to the side because I was like, I want to just figure out what's happening here. I don't need to hear any more like vengeance tales, you know? But they both like did a pretty good job. I mean, I interviewed Michelle in a cafe in Harlem and Nikki was there like listening to the whole thing. It's strange, but they felt to me like people who I'd interviewed with Landmark Forum. Do you know what I mean? They were obviously trying to do the like, we're just normal young professionals who have found something in this.
So you interviewed people that are peripheral, which you probably didn't know at that time that those two people in particular weren't inner circle and had spent
I had a sense.
Yeah, they were peripheral and
Right. I didn't have a sense that they were pawns in a new game of chess. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't understand that at one point there were 500 pawns and now there were like 5 pawns left and we were playing a new game of chess. I just thought these are some followers that they want me to meet. But in any case, the point I was driving towards is when I went to Mexico, I was still in the place of like, okay, nobody can explain what this is. I will sit down with Keith and he will wow me with his ideology. And I'll have this incredible scene of him tripping the light fantastic by telling me all of these things that he believes in the world and how you shouldn't be a victim in your own mind and like blah, 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 blah. Whatever it was he was going to say, that I had enough of a sense that the victim thing was very, very central, right? And he like could not have flubbed that worse. And I don't know if it's he had stage fright or like what exactly happened, or he just thought like he could word salad me for hours at a time and I would just be fine with it. But there are hours of Keith and they're almost like unlistenable because it's just, he doesn't make any sense, you know? And I still was like, okay, well, so this is Oz, right? This is the guy behind the curtain. But there must still be something that's drawing these people in. And I think I have thought to myself, did he try to be more bumbling because he thought that that would be a good tactic? Because then I would think he couldn't possibly be behind Oz, right?
Possibly.
But I think really what it is like I had gone through a lot of the old litigation. I had a lot of questions about what had happened with NXIVM 9. You know, I was asking things like, do you think it's moral and correct to have gone after these people with legal threats? And things that he like didn't have on his dance card of what he thought he was going to be asked about.
That probably threw him.
I think it's probably a big combination of all of those things.
Were you interviewing him in front of other people?
There was a guy in the room who was sitting like further away, like maybe in like a living room, and we were in a dining room. And then Claire sort of like maybe came in and out, but I don't think she was really sitting there.
Do you know who the guy was?
Well, the guy was the guy who Claire was working with to, you know, get her side of the story out. Yeah, a publicist.
Oh, the publicist. Okay.
Yeah.
Who shall remain nameless.
I ask only because I think the wheels fell off when Pam wasn't around, I think. Pam was the manager.
Right.
Let's let them know who Pam is first, because if people don't know.
Pam was, well, I thought Pam was his assistant the whole time I was there. And then I found out around the time that she died that it was his life partner. They'd been together since she was like late teen, early 20s, right now? At the ski, when he poached her from the ski slopes in her rich little ski bunny outfit. And she was like the Ghislaine Maxwell of the group. She procured women for him. Yeah. And then she died of cancer suddenly.
Right. And she died of cancer suddenly. I did know Barbara died of cancer, and I did know she died of cancer, and I knew they were both his girlfriends. And I definitely thought, oh God, like he has, you know, the code to fix cancer or whatever. Like, this is insane. He's telling me that like these women didn't get, you know, full treatment because my father had cancer. So basically, I would say in terms of like a lift, and I would be fascinated to know if they had researched me and found my father's obituary, if they knew that he had died like recently, you know, but in terms of that, like talking about Pam and Pam's death was a big part of what they wanted to talk to me about, right? And it was, Pam was my life partner. I loved her. She was sort of like mother to everybody, right? Claire telling me like how much she loved Pam. Everybody had these little Tiffany, heart necklaces that Claire had bought for them, I guess, when they went to Fiji. And I can't remember if she said that was right before before Pam died or right before she was diagnosed, but they had gone there for a trip. And I remember her, she was crying about Pam. I mean, Keith was crying about Pam. And I, watched the video tribute to Pam that they made in Albany, like, once I went to Albany, which I'm sure you guys have heard about or saw.
We were there.
Oh, so this was the same tribute that they just played again for my benefit probably or something at the Coach Summit.
Yeah, I'm assuming because we were still in when she died and we went to her very bizarre funeral.
Okay.
And they played that video.
Yeah. Okay.
Assuming it's the same one. Like her modeling photos and like progressing.
Yeah, it was just like felt like a memorial video. And so, I, again, like having met all these women who seemed sort of like nice-ish, I was like, well, Pam seems nice-ish, and I mean, I would say that, Nippy, that is what I thought, is that, okay, maybe what happened here is when Pam died, Keith had to come up with a way to draw everybody closer to him, make people more dependent on him. And this is how he formulated DOS in his mind, because he just flipped out about like controlling women and not having anybody else leave. And this was his like demented, like horrific notion from that,
And we've spoken to people who left way before, like who left in like 2009, 10. And she said that, and she was part of the harem, who's friends with us now. She left a long time ago. She slipped away. Like Nancy said, you can leave and just make it not bad because, a lot of people did. A lot of people did. That was true. Right. People did leave. If they didn't make a stink, they'd be left alone. And she said that when she heard about what DOS was, she said, well, that's just what life was like. It was the same thing. It just wasn't called DOS.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've heard that.
He took photos of their vaginas.
He enslaved he's not trying to empower, he's trying to enslave.
Yeah. And so his harem was basically DOS, and then he formalized it into a thing and made it more ritualistic and systematized.
Right.
I think your assessment was pretty bang on, just missing that piece, which obviously they weren't going to tell you. Okay, we're not going to summarize that too much and just say stay tuned for next week.
Stay tuned. It's intermission, right?
This is
the
intermission.
part where you get up, you go to the bathroom.
Go to the gym.
Maybe,
Go for a walk.
Or take a break.
Listen to Infamous.
Sure, all that stuff.
And also, we've been reading our best and worst reviews over on Patreon. Please do write us a review. It really does help.
It's mostly me they hate.
I mean, I didn't want to say that, but
Yeah, but you kind of.
you guys are awesome. Have a good day. Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred. True story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.